is the Museum of Jewish Heritage Video History Project. Today is July 25th, 1990. I'm Toby Bloom-Dopkin, and my colleague is Hannah Levinsky-Kovari, and we're speaking with Mr. Armand Handfus. Perhaps we can begin by asking you when you were born and who your parents were, where you were born.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the museum for allowing me to be part of this project and program. I think it's very important to commemorate the memory of those who disappeared in the Holocaust and to continue the traditions of Jewish heritage. So my name is Armand Handfus. I'm French. I was French born. I was born on the 22nd of May, 1927. And that's an historical date because Charles Lindbergh, landed in Paris on that particular date at the Bourget on the actually landed on the 21st of May, the night before, and I was born a few hours later on the 22nd of May, 1927. He was, as you know, Charles Lindbergh in a solo flight from the U.S. In the Strait of St. Louis is a pioneer of modern aviation. Now, I was born in the Rothschild Hospital in Paris, and Rue Santé. It's a very nice hospital, and my name Armand is a mistake of translation. My mother, who did not speak any French when she gave birth, asked a roommate at the time to translate how she wanted to give the Jewish name Enoch Yosef, which is Henry Joseph. And the woman next bed, who was lying next to her, said it's Armand. And that's how the name Armand came to be my name, when it's actually it's a mistake of translation. It's strange that I became a translator for the working for the Museum of Jewish Heritage, some 63 years later. Anyway, now if you want to know about my background, my parents were born in Warsaw. My father was born on the 15th of May in 1895, and my mother was born also in Warsaw on the 13th of March 1892. Now, they came from very religious families. I know that my father's fathers, my grandparents, I never know. They were, they were very pious, and they were Hasidic, and they followed the Jewish tradition extremely closely. I have some pictures. You will see them in their clothing. They were, up to the First World War, they were fairly well off. They were working in the shoe, the top of the shoe, the leather shoe, and they had a small shop, and they employed several workers. My father learned the trade as an operator, sewing up the shoe, at the top of the shoe. But during the First World War, the things deteriorated, and there was a German occupation, and I understand that they lost everything. There was no work, and they died of starvation. So I was told my grandfather first, and followed by my grandmother. And that was in 1918, 1919. Now, from my mother's side, I know very little, because I know that her father was dead from way back. I mean, I've seen pictures. I have one in my portfolio. Her mother died in the 30s, when she was in relationship when we were already settled in Paris. She wrote to them in Yiddish, and then one day, I remember when I was a young child, she received a letter that she had passed away, and which provoked tremendous consternation and grief. And my mother being pious, I remember, sitting Shiva, sitting in mourning for 8 days, crying, covering all the mirrors, and even sitting not on a chair, but on the reverse chair, and so forth. Now, in the 20s, apparently my mother and father met, and they got married in Poland, I believe, around 1920. In 1921, my older brother, was born in Warsaw, and they remained there until 1921. The economic situation was very bad. It was always my father's dream to come to the U.S., where he had a brother. He has one brother, who is, by the way, still living. He's 105, my uncle. But for whatever reason, it did not work out. There were new immigration laws which came into effect in the 20s from the American side, and he could not come to the U.S. But instead he went to Argentina by himself, and he settled in Buenos Aires. Instead of doing shoes, he became a handbag operator. He was very skilled, and always boasting that he was the best, in his trade, and he could make more money and so forth. So he stayed there for about 3 years. He became an Argentine citizen, was sending money to my mother, who still had a child, and asking her to join him. She absolutely refused. She did not want to go to Argentina. Argentina had a very bad reputation at that particular time, and there were all kinds of stories regarding women and all kinds of things. She refused to go in that land. So he decided to come back, and he stopped off in Paris for several weeks, and he lived with a cousin, and then he decided that maybe he'd like Paris. He said maybe she would like to join him, and she said yes. And she came with my older brother, and they settled in Paris, where they lived all their lives. I was born on 1927, 2 years later. Now that takes us to the life in Paris. We lived in a popular district in Paris. It was working people. It was one large room with a kitchenette, small kitchen. There were no toilet. We had to go down into the hallway. There was gas and electricity, which in these days we considered modern. We had always plenty of food on the table. We were a close-knit family. My mother was religious. She kept 2 sets of dishes, dairy and for meat. And Passover, she had an extra set of dishes. She would do the light candles on Friday night, and more or less follow the religious traditions of the religion. But my father was not as religious as she was, but anyway, he would, he could not care less too much about, eating kosher, and, sometimes he would he'd do certain things that she did not particularly care for. So we lived there for until my brother was born. First of all, I went to school, primary school, kindergarten. Then I went to primary school. Across the street, there was a school, public school. I was a very good student. And, it was a time where things were not too bad economically. He had a very good job. He was able to save a little bit of money. He was able to afford the vacations on summer, we didn't go too far away. It was just outside of Paris. For 2 months he would rent like a little house, 1 or 2 rooms, and we stayed there in the summer. And I remember very happy times when we went around the fields, we went picking berries, and we spent happy summers there. My father was working at the time with my mother and my older brother, and he would come out every Friday night until Sunday night, where he would take the limousine. There was a limousine shuttling back and forth. My mother was an extremely dedicated and very good person, a very Jewish mother in the full sense of the word. She could sacrifice herself for the sake of the family. She was always up at the crack of dawn. She worked very hard, shopping and cooking and doing the laundry. In these days there was no washing machine. And I do recall on Thursday, where in France we had a day off, I would sometimes meet her in the laundry the room. There was a huge laundry, and it was like Dante's Inferno, the huge smoke and people whopping, and then she was there, with that big wash, and I remember that very vividly. She used to bake, and she used to do noodles, bake noodles, because my father did not care for the noodles which were processed. He wanted homemade noodles, and he used to get homemade noodles every day. So, and we had plenty of food. There was never any problem of being hungry. He had a fairly good job, and it was a nice life under the circumstances. I can only think of these days as happy ones. My father was sometimes short-tempered, and I remember during the Depression time there was one instance where he lost his job over an argument with his boss, and my mother, who was bedridden at the time with jaundice, and when he came home on Friday night saying that he had an argument with the boss and he lost his job, she became very upset. She said, when it's so hard to get a job, I'll see what I can do. And I remember getting up, sick as she was, taking a cab and taking me along, and in the evening asking the boss to take him back. And I remember, they were talking Yiddish. For 1 full hour, they were talking in proverbs. She was telling a proverb, and he was answering with another proverb, and she was counter telling him another proverb, and it went on for about a full hour. After the hour, he said, "Fine, he can come back on Monday. I'll be glad to come back." And he came back and he got a job back. And she came home and she went back to bed. She went because she was still sick. She was really a wonderful person. Now, as I mentioned before, we had 1-room apartment. And in 1934, my small kid brother was born. He was born on the 11th of June 1934. Now, obviously, one room for 5 people it wasn't pretty tight, the situation, you know. It just happened that a few months later, the next door apartment became vacant, you know, on the same floor, and my father had the idea. He said, well, if I ask the landlord to break down the wall, we could have a bigger apartment. We could have 3 rooms instead of 1. So he requested permission, and it was granted. And I remember all that mess, you know, these construction workers, you know, breaking down the wall, filth, you know. And finally, we had a big apartment, and we had 2 kitchens then. There was the kitchen from the other apartment and the kitchen from the former apartment with 2 doors. So one kitchen was used as a storage room from the former apartment, and we used to live more or less in the new part of the apartment. It was like a railroad apartment. Maybe I can illustrate. This is the old apartment. You see here, the bedroom, and this is the little kitchen. Now, here we had a track, this like a little bridge and track, and it was with a church, the Menilmontant church, well known because Maurice Chevalier was born in the neighborhood. And there was a little roof there. As a matter of fact, I do have another picture where I will show later on. There's a little roof, and you see there's a window, and here's a window from the kitchen. Now, what the new apartment, then this is the door, entrance door. Now, the new apartment was this. We had a living room, and then we had like a dining area, and there was another little kitchen, and where there was an entrance door. That means that when we came from the street, you could enter through here or through here. In these days, there was no problem. Sometimes we entered, there were keys, you know, on the door. We could enter either way. That was the street, the little street, which ran facing the building. This was the track. Now, in 1934, then we were living in this area.
Could you tell us a little bit about your neighborhood, what the street looked like,
yes.
and who your neighbors and friends were?
Well, it was a district, a working district. It was not typically a Jewish, although we had many Jewish families. It was not like the Pletzel where only Jews lived. It was a mixed, I would say maybe 25% Jews and the rest non-Jewish. Now, in our building, for instance, we were the only Jews, and in school, of course, I mixed with more or less with Jewish friends, you know, also Polish who had come in the 30s and were working either they were tailors or they were working the leather goods industry, just like my father. It was a very Amish kind of a homey kind of neighborhood where everything was, you could get, on the street you could get everything except a bank. There was no bank, but you could Downstairs there was a dairy shop. Across the street there was a cafe. Then there was a school across the street. Then next door was a tailor shop. Then there was a place where a grocery shop. Then you could actually live within the street, but for the bank you had to go elsewhere a little bit further. But everything was contained within a very narrow, parameter. The shopping, you didn't do a week shopping in these days. You went every day. You went down. If you needed a quart of milk, you crossed the street, you got your milk, or two, and you didn't buy 12 eggs, you bought 2 eggs, or 1 egg at a time, or a little bit of butter. And there was no refrigeration, we had no icebox, and we had a little balcony here. There was a little balcony which I don't know. The only balcony of the street belonged to us. Here, living room. Here we had a little balcony right here. Yeah. And we, when we went out on the balcony, we could, first of all, we could store butter, a little dish with water, to keep it cool in the summer. We went out, you could see the world pass by, all the people, with their habits, the people passing and that we knew, they would say hi, and people had certain habits, so you knew at certain hours what to expect and to see them, and it was a very neighborhood kind of a feeling. Now, in the 30s, with the rise of the Nazism and fascism, the situation deteriorated with regards to Jews, and there was an element of anti-Semitism which we felt, at every level. Even in school, little kids would mention, I remember mentioned to me, if you don't like it, you go back to your own country, or dirty Jew, or things like that. There were some derogatory remarks, even from little kids, and when you spoke Yiddish, in public places, people would look at you, and they would make certain remarks. You felt a lot of hostility rising during that period against Jews. The right-wing movement became very strong, and there was some rioting between, I know, in 1937 there was some demonstration which, involved fascist groups and left-wing, and there was some kind of demonstration, and, Now, in 1936, there was the Front Populaire with Léon Blum, and with socialism, which did not last too long, and then we get into 1938, where the rise of fascism and the Munich agreements, and we knew that war may be imminent. Now, I remember in 1939, we left, as usual, for our little vacation, in the summer, and we had a little place, about 20 miles from Paris.
Where was it?
It was in it's called Morsan-sur-Orge. It's a little place. It's like here you would say Muncie, New York. Just not too far. It's about 20 miles from Paris. We went you went for 2 months, July and August, and then because of the felt that the war may be imminent, remember we came home early, did not went until the end of August. And as a matter of fact, the war broke out on September 1st, 1939.
Excuse me, you mentioned that your parents were at one point stateless because they were Polish citizens.
No, that
Could
was
you go
not. It was
before that.
No, before that they were Polish.
Right.
They were Polish. They kept their Polish citizenship. They were resident of France, and they had applied for citizenship. I think in maybe 1935 or 1936, but the formalities took much longer than they had expected, and the application, we made an application until after the war, and it was never processed, and the war broke out and everything stopped. But he was legal, he was a legal resident when there were a lot of illegal Jewish Poles who worked illegally and who had problems with the police. But my parents were legal. He had a working permit, and he had some kind of Polish passport, and he worked legally, just like a resident. And now we get into the war now. Now everything starts deteriorating. Now, at the outbreak of the war in September 1939, all the kids of Paris were evacuated to various parts of the country, the Parisian, because they expected Paris to be bombed. So I was 12, and they asked me to be here, and so I registered, and here I am on the train saying goodbye to my mother, my father, and I'm going to like an unknown destination. We don't know where we were going. It's almost like we're being deported, in a way. It was like, and then we reached a small town called the Tréport, which is located maybe 150 miles from Paris, in the northern part on the channel. And it was September, and they put us up in a school where there were no beds. Nothing had been organized. They were receiving hundreds of children, and they had not prepared for that, for this kind of situation. So they didn't know what to do with us. So they put us in classrooms with straw. We were sleeping on straw in classroom kids, and especially in that particular part of France, September is already cool, and we were shivering, and slept with our clothing on. It was so cold, and then they forced us to go swimming in the icy, chilly waters of the channel during the day. There were older kids who used to push us around and even beat us up if we were doing something, we're not in rank, and they would just hit us. It was an infernal situation. Now, this camp was disbanded within a week because everybody complained. And my father came and got me back after a week. And I came home. I remember it was a long train ride. It took 7 hours, and my mother was very worried. And when we opened the door in the middle of the night, she just grabbed me, thinking, that she thought we'd never see us again. Now that night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was an air raid, which was, the Germans came over Paris, but they did not bomb, and everybody went down to the cellar of the building. It was a shelter. All the cellars were made into shelters. Now, all the windows were painted in blue to avoid being seen by the airplane. They remember putting little slit of papers and strip of papers over the windows in case there's a bombing, that it should not shatter, the glass shouldn't shatter. I remember that. And during the next few months, which was called the phony war, we had many air raids which were not, there were no bombings. They came just like observers, planes who flew over, and then, but anyway, the alert was sounded and we had to go down with my kid brother, everybody just in pajamas or whatever. We went down to the shelter in the building and we met the other people. As I mentioned, we were the only Jews living in the building, and we remained that for the rest of the war. Now, that was in 1939 and 40. Now, 40, everything was, we did not know because it was a very strange situation. Nothing was moving. There was absolutely, it's called the phony war. The Germans were not attacking, and the French were just, no battle, and people were just waiting to see what's going to happen. And then hell broke loose in May 1940, when the general offensive of the Germans struck through the Netherlands and Belgium on the 10th of May. And then everything precipitated, because from the 10th of May to the 15th of June, when they entered Paris, it was an open city. All the walls were clogged with refugees. People were leaving. It was just an absolute mess. It was absolutely, and people have seen pictures of the refugees, with cars and all kinds of locomotion, clogging the walls and the planes, strafing them and things like that. My brother, older brother, who felt he was 6 years older than I, and he could serve in the army practically, because in 1940 he was 19. We felt that maybe he should go, and he said he was going to join the ranks of refugees, and he left. And I don't know how he got, but he got to southern France, and he remained there for several weeks until Paris was occupied and the armistice was signed by Pétain, and everything was eased. There was an armistice line with the northern part of France called the occupied France, and then the southern part, which was called the non-occupied, and the Vichy government. That was the deal between Hitler and Pétain. And so he returned, and he was there. He came, all of a sudden we saw him coming back, and we were there. We continued living, although things became exceedingly difficult as far as food. They instituted ration, books, food ration, tickets. You couldn't find anything. No coal. Everything became very hard. My father worked on and off, and it was becoming very difficult to live on. Now in 1941, and then things worsened because the new laws came into effect against Jews. They took away the shops, the businesses. You're not allowed to own a business. It became all the businesses had a commissioner who were exercising control, and you had to surrender all your assets. All the assets that you had in the bank were frozen, Jewish assets. You could not, then they made certain decrees that you could not frequent and go to public, Jews go to public places, you could not go to the movies, there was a special curfew, at 8 o'clock you have to be home, shopping hours were limited for Jews, it was between 3 and 4, where you couldn't find any food, you had to take the last car in the metro. You had to take the last car in the metro and then be in the back of a bus if you took a bus. You were not allowed to go into libraries, you were not allowed to go into cafes, you weren't allowed to go into theaters or into any sport events. You were very restricted, and you were not allowed to leave the Department of Seine, which Paris is, without a special permit signed by the German authorities. That was in 1941. Now in 1941 also, I remember there was, I don't know which month, but there was what they call a terrorist attack against a German member of the forces. Somebody killed a German in the 11th arrondissement, which is one of the arrondissements of Paris, and they took reprisals. All of a sudden, they took one morning, they arrested all the Jews in the 11th arrondissement off the street, usually youngsters, young men. My older brother, who was working at the time, and he was working in the 11th arrondissement, getting out of the subway, all of a sudden he sees a barrage of cops, asking papers, and he just turned around and went right back. I mean, it was his luck that he just happened to see that there was a barrage of cops, and he knew that they were rounding up, and he presumed it was again for Jews. So the people were sent to two camps in Beaune-la-Rolande and Pithiviers, which were about 100 miles or 80 miles from Paris. And they were those two camps where all these people were sent. And they did absolutely nothing. It was not this concentration camp. It was in 1941. So we knew that things were getting worse in Paris.
For you as a young boy at the
Yes,
time,
yes.
how did your daily existence change, your schooling, your friends, your daily life?
Well, I was, in 1941, I was going to high school, and they were still, I still had Jewish friends and other friends. There was not much chance that I couldn't go to the movies, or I could not go to parks, and I know it became very restrictive, that things, that I really felt that it was, I was something else, that, and not only that, but there was anti-Jewish propaganda which increased tremendously. There were exhibits of, the Jewish who were responsible for everything. They were, they built that in the minds of the people, and there was one newspaper to the scaffold. Au Pilori was absolutely a vile, abomination of slander, of all kinds of things. What the Jews, what they were responsible for the war, they were profiteering, they were all kinds, and with cartoons of the stereotype Jew with big noses and thick lips and greedy, and asking, trying to profiteer and things like that, and people would be influenced, because you would see a change in the spirit of the population, even though they would have, feel that maybe, those things were right, because after all this propaganda day after day, over the radio, in the newspapers, and special exhibits, and even pictures. There was an infamous picture called Jew Susse, the Jew Susse, which was made by the Germans, who was distributed throughout Europe, showing how evil the Jews, and that you had to get rid of them one way or the other, and they were, parasites of the economic life, and everything was their fault. If war and everything, you had an easy scapegoat was a Jew. So things were not particularly easy. We knew that there was not too much fun to be had, especially that we knew that the war was going on. It was and we just didn't know how long it would last. Germany was victorious all over, although they had failed to land in England, invade England. They were able to get practically all of Europe. I mean, nowhere in Greece, and then Czechoslovakia and Hungary, everything, all of Europe belonged to them, and they were extremely arrogant. Now the German soldiers behaved up to a point. Well, they had received orders in Paris not to. At first they did not do anything. So that is 1941, when the first anti-Jewish laws were promulgated by the French authorities under the sponsorship of the Germans. Now then we had to register as Jews. That was the next. I mean, that you had to be, or maybe that came first. I don't know in which chronological order, but we had to register as Jews, and if you had a quarter of 25% Jewish parentage, you were considered as Jewish. So when there was no problem with my parents, they registered as Jewish, and then they knew exactly who was Jewish and who wasn't, and that was. There were a lot of Jews who had money who left, and who were able to get over this demarcation line, called between separating north and south, between the so-called occupied zone, and the unoccupied zone, either with forged papers or getting a passer who you paid, who knew a spot where you could get through, and because over there were no Germans yet, and you felt that you had a certain amount of more freedom, and those people with money, they did that. So in the neighborhood, some of our friends left, and some of my friends left for the southern part of France, and did survive, all of them. Those who did not have any money were kept in the north. Those were targets for arrests and deportation later on. Now we go a little bit now into 1942, which becomes a very crucial and traumatic part of the experience. I think in May 1942, there was a decree that all the Jews from the 6-year-old had to wear a Jewish star. That means everybody in my family. My kid boy was already 8. He turned 8 in June 1934, so he had to wear the star. I wore the star, if you want to see it. When that's uncut, but what you would do, you see, you pin it here, you cut it, and you sew it on. Every other clothing had to be, when you went outside, you had to wear that.
Where did you get them at the time?
Yes, now there were centers of distribution. You had to buy them and even give textile points, because textile was also rationed, and I think it was 1 point, so you had even to buy, and cynically they even took away some of the textile points which you were allowed for other products. If you want to buy a pair of socks, you needed, I don't know, 5 or 6, or a shirt, you needed 10. You were allowed a certain number of textile points a month, or 3 months. And this you needed 1 and buy that particular thing.
How many would each individual or family need? How many actual pieces of stars?
Well, we didn't have that much clothing to start with. I would say, I think you could buy as many as you wanted. 3 maybe, since you had maybe a coat, and maybe on a jacket, and some people even pinned it. They had a way of pinning it, and to be able to remove it very quickly in case that if there was a roundup, and they would be able to hide it to get through in some way. Or some people, actually it had to be sewn, because you could be arrested if they found that it was loosely pinned, and because you probably had intentions of not wearing it properly or doing something illegal. So we were wearing that.
This particular one,
Yes.
Where is that from? Where do you have it
It is
from?
the original. It's a legacy of my late father. He left, I don't know, he had 6 or 7, and he gave them to me. He found that in his drawer, and before coming to the States, he said, this might be important to you. So he gave me 6, and I gave 2 to the museum. I still have 4 in my possession. Now, that was in May 1942. I was finishing high school. In June, I remember getting what we call brevet commercial, and I was finishing my studies. And I remember everybody, all the Jews, kids, wearing that, and the teachers one of the teachers was very anti-Semitic and making these very crude remarks about getting rid of some of the bugs that we have around here, and things like that, in the classroom. But that was in the end of the studies, the end of the school year, in June 1942. Now, in July 1942, we started to have, in mid-July, there were rumors that there would be a major roundup of Jews. Everybody was talking about it. All our friends, they said, within a day or 2, there will be a major roundup. They even said on the 16th of July, which is Thursday, the 16th of July, there would be a major roundup. Now, we just didn't know what to do. We felt that it only applied not to women and children. We had absolutely no idea that they would round up women and children, but it would be valid men. My father, my brother, maybe myself, I was 15 at the time, and people, were talking, said, well, I'm going to hide for that night. We're going to have a place where to go. And I can go in this apartment, I know some people have asked me to join them, non-Jewish people and things like that. We didn't have that. We just didn't know. And on the 15th of July, just the day before the supposedly roundup of Jews, my father had a very ingenious idea. I have to go back a few years. In the 30s, we had bought new furniture when we got this new apartment, and he had bought new furniture and a new set of a dining set for here, and there was a big wardrobe because we didn't have any closet at the time, where you could put all your clothing, and we had also a new little put your glasses and furniture. So on the 15th of July, my father had a very ingenious idea. He said, well, I have an idea. Now, since we have two kitchens, this and that one, yes, that's right. Since we have two kitchens, here and that, we're going to close up that kitchen. So we took out the knob, we pushed the wardrobe against that, obscuring the door, and although you could see from the top a little bit of the, if you went up on the chair, so we put some books and some paper just to, that you could not see anything. And he said, well, if they come, we would go out through that window, run onto that little roof, which was just a few feet, get into this and hide there in that little room. We went to sleep all dressed on Wednesday, July 15th, expecting anything to happen. In the middle of the night, nobody came. We expected, because it usually came in the middle of the night. At 5:30, we all fell asleep, and at 6 o'clock, they were there. And, hearing the knock at the door, because this we had condemned completely, and everybody, that was the official entrance. My father, my brother, and myself, we went through that little window and got into this. This was a very small kitchen, and we had a sink, and you could not stretch out. You had to, because it was very small, if you wanted to lie down, you had to be, sleep in a crooked way. It was very small. Now, two cops came in, a civilian and a uniform cop, asked, they had an index for each of us, asked where my father was, where my brother, where I was, and they asked my mother to get dressed and to follow them. And we were there listening, we could hear every word. And she started to scream. She absolutely, and it was very difficult because my father at some point, feeling that they were taking her instead of him, he wanted to surrender. He said, well, and we were holding him. He said, it's me that they want. They don't want her, woman. They want me. Let me. And we were holding him. And she was screaming. And my kid brother was crying. So they felt at the screams at 6 o'clock in the morning. They felt embarrassed. They said, okay, we'll come back with a squad. Now, during that particular period, my older brother started to have belly cramps. And, you know, I mean, from fear, and it's absolutely, you know, it's just a human reaction to have belly cramps. And he said, I have to. So he relieved himself in the sink. Well, all this action were taking place. Now we could not flush it with water, and it was there until the end. You can just imagine this kind of situation. So they left, and we came right back into the apartment, and my father said, well, let's all go. If they come back with a squad, let's all go. Or maybe, you know, that's they want me. But looking at from this window, and there's a little bridge, we saw people being dragged with bedding, children, women with suitcases, with carriages, baby carriages. And they realized at that particular point that they were arresting everybody. They were arresting women and children and men and everybody. And we even recognized some of our friends who were being arrested. So we knew that that was a major situation. It was not just men, but it was everybody who were being arrested.
How was it that your mother and a little brother stayed behind while the rest of you ran into the secret room?
We were convinced, although those rumors did not specify, they said there would be a major roundup of Jews, because up to then only men had been arrested and sent to the two camps, Pithiviers and Baudelaire. I don't know if the Drancy camp were created at this particular point. The Drancy camp, after this major roundup, and I think according to the figures, I think they got 12 or 13,000 people, which they parked into a stadium called Veldiv, which was an horrible, you know, all these people with children and on the very no sanitary conditions. They stayed there for 3 days until they were finally transferred to the camp, the Drancy, which was a transit camp, a few miles from Paris.
Excuse me, can we stop now? It's
Yeah.
been an hour, and I
Okay.
want to see
Change
if I
the
can
minute.
Okay.
light that up a little bit.
Okay, I heard it also, the air conditioning. That's the air conditioning, right?
Right.
Okay, so
The air conditioning. That's the air conditioning, right?
Right.
okay, so
Mr. Handfus, could you please tell us, go back a little bit and tell us what was your father and older brother doing during this period, and also what kind of entertainment were the Jews able to take part in, since they were not allowed to go to the theater or movies or other kinds of things?
but professional activity did not stop with the coming of the occupation. There were still some business which went on. My father continued to work on and off for in the handbag industry, although the business who had been owned by Jewish interests were now owned by the commissioner, you know, because it was a process of Aryanization which took place. All the businesses had to be under control of a commissioner as the assets were taken away from them. My brother as well worked in the same line of business. I forgot to mention that he became a framer in the leather. You know, in these days, handbags, they used metal frames, if you recall. You know, it was not like the zippers, but It was with a frame, and he became like a framer, and he worked in that line of business. But there were periods where they were unemployed because it was not business as usual. But on and off, I remember them leaving and working for regular jobs. On top of that, my father had a little sewing machine, and he worked independently at home. Odd jobs, people would bring him work, and he would do the sewing of handbags, and he always felt very proud about his accomplishment when there was a particular difficult job. He was the only one to be able to do it, so he was very proud. And so we would work. He would work at home as well. So there was still, it went on and off. There was some people who still continued working. Now, as far as entertainment, it was more or less a social type of entertainment that you made with people, and you could not listen to news. You could read newspapers, you could buy them on the stand, but you were not allowed to have radio. You had to surrender your radio, so you had to entertain with other people playing cards, or visiting each other, discussing the situation, hoping that things will be better, that the war would end very soon, and especially when there were certain spurts of hope when the U.S. entered the war in December 1941. We felt that, things would not last very long. Now the Americans were in, but it did not. That did not take place.
Did you recall any bar mitzvahs or weddings or any other kind of Jewish festivals or festive activities during this period?
I don't recall mine because I was never bar mitzvah. At the outbreak of war, I was 12, and I started to go to Hebrew school, and then the Germans came in, and everything was dislocated, and the teacher, he was a rabbi, wasn't there anymore, and it just went, and I was never bar mitzvah. So the fact that I never learned how to read Hebrew because of that period, although my mother wanted, she was very pious. So I had never had any religious upbringing because of that particular period. It dislocated and uprooted everything in my life. My brother had, because he was older, was bar mitzvah. I remember very well when we went to the synagogue, local synagogue, and and then we had a little reception at home, with the leker and sweet cake and little bit of alcohol, bromfum we call that, and little sweets. I also remember the breast from my kid brother very vividly. There was also the rabbi who came for circumcision at home, and we had invited some people, some friends, and there was a little reception for that event. So now we are back into the period of the 16th of July, when the cops came. My mother screamed, and they left. They were embarrassed. They left, and they said they would come back with a squad. But they did not that day. If they would have come back, probably they would have found everybody, and we would have gone. Everybody would have been arrested. They did not come back. in the morning, that was 6 o'clock in the morning, about 10 o'clock, I decided to have a great uncle who had a small business, a jewelry business, and he liked me, and we used to be very close contact with him. His business had been organized. Although he could still be there, he was not allowed to do any business, although he occupied the shop. You know, it was not too far from the opera place, and he was fairly well off because he was in that particular kind of business. And he was married to an Alsatian. It was his third wife, and she was not Jewish. And he spoke German at home, and I speak a little bit of German because of that. Because she spoke German, Alsatian German. His little store, which I have a picture, you will see. You know, it's there are all kinds of signs saying "end of business." So he played an important part because I went to see him on that particular day, and he put me up for the night. He said, "You stay with me now for a few days until maybe things are going to ease up," because he was not on the wanted list because he was married to, for some reason, older. He was already he was close to 70, and they did not take people of that age. You know, the method, the selection, there was a selection already, not only in Auschwitz, but already then, there was a selection of a method of rounding up Jews were done extremely methodically. First, they would take the stateless, but even then there was a category. They wouldn't take babies or infants, but they would, and people older than 60, but everybody else. Now, with children, if a child was under the age of 16, and he was born, which was my case, he was born in France, that means he was a French citizen, he would still be, he had to follow his parents if they were aliens or stateless, if they were arrested. That was the first stage of the roundup of Jews, where they took women and children. Now, so on the 16th of July, I went to see my uncle, and I stayed with him for a couple of days. In the meantime, on the 17th of July, the next day, they came back. And that's an interesting story because at that time, of course, we knew, my brother, my mother, they knew that they were arresting women and children. Now, we had a cousin, and she was in her upper 60s, maybe 65, but she was one of these old, you know, women, they use, you know, walks very slowly, you know, seeing, you know, they walk and they can't move because they're overweight, and so she came to visit us in the morning. Well, I wasn't there. They came to visit her, and we so help God that you saw you are still there. You know, you haven't been arrested, and we're so thankful. You know, and my daughter was arrested, and my son was arrested, and with their family, and she was arrested yesterday, and I'm so glad you're there. So my father said, you know, they may still come in the apartment. I don't want to chase you out, but maybe you should leave because they may come any minute. Oh, I'm so glad, and she's staying on, you know, and they made tea for her, you know. And while she's there, all of a sudden, the police is coming, and they are banging with their shoes. Now you have a stranger, an overweight old woman who cannot go through the window. My mother, kid brother, my brother, they all go. They go out and they hide into this place. My father stays with this old woman, and he says, well, she cannot go through the window. It's impossible. So they bang, they don't force the door, they didn't open the door, but he could see through the window that they were downstairs and they were pointing from the street, pointing to the little balcony. That's where we live, with the super, because he was pointing, that's where they live. So he opened the door this way. He opened the door, this door. He pushed her out and he said, go up and then come down. And that woman did not speak a word of French. If they ask you anything, say, personne, nobody. Go up and go down. But when he opened the door, he didn't know that maybe there was a cup behind it. He just took a chance. So he pushed her out, and she went up, and she went down. And then he closed the door, locked the door, went into the room. 10 minutes later, they called the locksmith, opened the door, and the tea, which she had been served, the hot water was still there, and they said they must still be around because there's hot water. So they went around, searched, opened the wardrobe, and they were all in there, could not find anything. And they said, okay, we'll find them. And they left. That was on the 17th of July. The next day I came back and I found out about this situation.
Where had you been?
With my great uncle. Now, he had asked that my brother, because he sent me back, he said, well, there had been some talk that the people, young children of 16 and over, if they were French, were allowed to stay. And I was only 15, but he felt that maybe I would fall under this particular ruling that because I was French, a French citizen, I could stay in the apartment. So my brother, we traded. My brother went and he was there for 3 weeks in his apartment. He could only take one. Now that was on the 18th of July 1942. Now, for about the next 10 days or so, things were very tight. We just didn't know what to expect. My mother would go down for food, or by between the hours of 3 and 4, and come back. My kid brother was not allowed to play, and although that was a problem because he was playing always in the streets, he was used to go, and it was summer, and he would complain bitterly that it was not fair. Why all the other kids he could not understand. All the other kids were playing in the street, but he had to stay in and not make any noise. He could not understand that. So he would go down anyway and play. And so we had a problem with him because he would be up and down, and we never knew if the police would come while he was opening the door and running up and down the stairs. Now, on Monday night, on the fateful Monday, 3rd of August, 1942, It was a very hot day. Again, my kid brother, I forgot to mention a few days before was Tisha B'Av, and I remember my mother fasting for that particular day. You know, the Tisha B'Av, which is, I think, the destruction of the temple, she fasted for that particular day. She was very, So on the 3rd of August, 1942, it was in the afternoon, my kid brother, my mother decided, said, well, I'll go down, we'll go across the street. There was a family living, we lived on number 17, they lived looking the other way. This is the street. This is number 17. They lived here, number 10, just across the street. There was a family with 5 kids, all French. The parents were stateless, Polish, also in the leather industry. They're doing some leather goods, handbags. They had not been arrested, or nobody came on the 16th of July, and he felt that for whatever reason, that he was exempt, that because he was a good Jew who paid his taxes, who had never had any problems with the police, that he would not be arrested, and maybe he had 5 children, and he did not fall under the arrest decree of rounding up. So, and that his house was safe. So my kid brother wanted to play, and used to play with one of their children of the same age. There were 5 of them. One of them was a close friend of mine. We used to go to school, was exactly the same age. And my mother decided to, early in the afternoon, around 3 o'clock, to go across the street and to spend a few hours with them, to socialize. So she went across, number 10. At around 3:30, all of a sudden, this banging at the door. My father runs, hides in this kitchen. I opened the door. 2 cops, one in uniform, one civilian. They have an index card with our 5 names. Where is your father? I said, I don't know. I haven't seen him since July 16th. I think he's been arrested. Where's your older brother? I don't know. Where's your mother? Well, she went down shopping. Okay, we'll wait for her. So they sit down and make small talk. And about 15-20 minutes, they said, okay, we'll return, we'll come back. They go downstairs. I wait a few minutes. I go downstairs as quickly as possible, look around to see if they're not followed. Go up to number 10, and everybody's there. And when I'm there, maybe 10 minutes later, there's a ring at the door, and the father opens the door, and the same cops come in. Now, time stopped for me at that particular, and from that on, everything changed. That particular, the fraction of time where I still have that feeling, when the cops came in, time absolutely stopped. I knew that everything would be different from then on, and everything was. So they recognized me, said, oh, here you are, and that's your mother? Oh, fine. So okay, so everybody will pack and you will follow us. So there's, the commotion with 5 kids living in a small apartment, putting things together, bags. So I said, well, okay, I'm going to pack. My mother did not. She did not say anything. she did not want to go back to the apartment. She was afraid that because she knew my father was hiding, and that she might give away, or he might collapse and he might surrender. So she didn't want to go back. So she stayed upstairs, you know, and I went down and I went up and I told my father, and when we were both crying, we started to pack for whatever, you know, put little, you know, woolens and whatever things we could find, you know, a prayer book for, I remember, you know, things, you know, just put 2 suitcases, which I carried down. And they were downstairs already, waiting for me. And there were 4 cops, 2 civilians, and 2 uniform, regular police. And one seemed to be the leader of the operation. And he says to me, "Well, you coming with us?" So I said, "I'm coming." He said, "Yes, you're coming with us." I said, "Well, no, I don't want to go. I'm 16 and I'm French. Where should I go and have an uncle who will take care of me?" He said, "You're 16. You have your ID?" So I took out my identity paper, which you had to, all people from the age of 15 had to carry, and I showed him, and he said, "But you're not 16, you're 15. You turned 15 just a few weeks ago. You coming with us?" I said, "No, I mean, my uncle will take care of me, and, you know, I mean, I don't want to go." And he said, "I don't know." All of a sudden he said, "Okay, you're staying." Now, this wave, just this wave of hand, "You staying," he would have said, "You coming." He said, "You staying." Now, I don't know if he was thinking that I would lead him eventually to my father and to my brother, and that they would get more people, they would get, you know, the entire family. Maybe that's what they had in mind. But in the meantime, "You're staying." So I carried the suitcases. They were actually, the roundup netted 9 people. I mean, the 5 children, including my friend, the couple, you know, my mother and my kid brother. So I carried their suitcases until the next corner, and I said goodbye. I kissed, you know, we kissed, and that's the last I ever saw of them. When I came back, you know, we were absolutely destroyed. My father just didn't know what to do with, you know, crying, just, you know, everything is finished. We didn't have any food. The neighbor, non-Jewish, helped us. She fed us, you know, she took pity on us. The super knew that there was a hiding place, because he knew that, he didn't know how, nobody knew, but they knew that we were hiding. And he never reported, and he was very sympathetic. They helped us, these 2 people. The neighbor brought us in food for the next week or so. Now, in the meantime, we were staying home. My brother was still, I told my brother, I went over to my great uncle to inform my brother what happened. And that was a tearful, you know, reunion with my brother. So, and I was back with my father in that apartment. Now 2 days later, 2 or 3 days later, that again, we are eating, my father and myself, here, in the dining area. It's 7 o'clock. It's a very quiet evening, sunny, peaceful summer evening. All of a sudden, we hear, you know, boots, you know, they tiptoed. You don't hear them on the steps. When they went up the steps, they tiptoed, and then went in front of the door, they started to hit, you know, with the boots. Now, we're eating, we have two plates of soup. So I take one plate, my father is running like hell, gets into this, closes the window, I close the window, but the Venetian blind is still shaking, from the movement. Now I come back, open the book of poetry, and I open the door, and 5 cops come in. Push me. Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you open the door? They push me from this, run into that, run right into here, and the thing is batting. One of them opens the window, looks out from that roof, looks here, cannot imagine that this window is part of the same apartment. And he said, don't you worry, we'll get your father. We know you're hiding him somewhere. We'll get him eventually. And they come out. And even one can say, oh, you're reading Lamartine, that's very good. He makes a comment. And they leave. And they leave me by myself. They came actually in all that period. I remember opening 10 times the door to the cops and later on to the Germans, because we had also an adventure with the Germans. They came 10 times, but that was the most traumatic, because I still remember when he opened the few days later they came again, and they only could find me. They did not. They came and they left. Now, at that time, I got a letter from my mother asking that I should, giving me advice in Drancy, which was a transit camp, asking me to send clothing and to send food. So my uncle, I didn't know how to get about it. He said, well, there's a Jewish committee who takes care of these things. It's Rue de la Bienfaisance, and it's a Jewish, you have to make a package. He helped me making a package, and you should go there in the afternoon and give out the package. So one afternoon, I went to that committee, and I went up, I remember the last floor where there used to be a reception center where all the packages destined for people in Drancy were kept, because then they would be collected there and then sent by truck to the camp. And there was a woman there, older woman, who says, are you by yourself? I mean, where are your parents? So I said, well, my mother is in Drancy with my kid brother, and where's your father? I was not going to tell her that I was hiding my father. I said, I don't know. You mean he disappeared on the 16th of July? Do you have any other brother? I said, yeah, also he's gone. And you're just by yourself? I said, yes, I'm by myself. And who takes care of you? I said, well, I have an uncle, great uncle, I see occasionally. He said, but you just by yourself? Yes. And, I look so fragile and just like a kid, She said, would you like to work here? I said, well, yes. She said, okay, well, the chief of personnel is a friend of mine. Maybe I'll give him a call. So she called him in front of me, and he said, well, I have a very nice boy. Maybe do you have a job? He said, oh, we need someone in the mailroom. He said, well, I'm going to send him over, and you interview him, and then if you like him, maybe, and he's just by himself, and, So it was 2 blocks away. They had, usually was called, they had 2 centers. One was Rue de la Bienfaisance, but the headquarters was Rue de Téhéran, which is 2 blocks away, where the headquarters, that means all the leading personalities and the vice president and the secretary general and there was chief of personnel, everybody was in that particular office. So I went up and I saw the chief of personnel, and he said, okay, well, fine, we need somebody, and when can you start? I said, well, can you start tomorrow? Yes, I'll be there tomorrow. So I knew that those working for the Jewish committee had a certain amount of immunity from being arrested. There were 2 types of exemptions from being arrested. If you worked directly for the Germans, and in the 1941 especially, when there was a very harsh winter, and the Russian front, they needed furs, and Jews were, as you know, were employed in, there were a lot of furriers. Some of them worked on furs, and they were granted certain Ausweis, a permit that they were needed for the production effort, and they would not be arrested. The Jewish Committee also, because they assisted Jews, it was one of the organizations which was set up by the Vichy government to assist Jews. It was a smokescreen to, that they are protected by their own organization. The same thing happened in all the occupied countries where they set up a Jewish committee, and in France was no any difference. Those working were exempted from arrest, so they said, as well as their families, not the older brother, but the younger brother. So when I knew that, and I immediately realized that it might be a salvation for my father, and it was indeed. So when I came home, and it took me quite a bit of time to come home because there were some formalities, of employment, filling out a form, something, and asking all kind of information. My father had requested, he was out of tobacco, and that I should buy some tobacco. He was a heavy smoker, especially under these tense moments, that I should buy some tobacco on the black market. He was out of cigarettes, and he couldn't stand it any longer. He didn't know where I was. It was already 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. I wasn't there. I'd been gone all day with a package, the parcel, and I had not returned. He thought maybe he had been arrested. And so he packed, and he said, they would have come that day, I would have opened the door. But instead of the police, I came and I told them the good news, that I would be employed by that agency, and we may have some kind of protection. Although he did not know if it would apply to him, because he had been wanted by the police. Now, so I started to work for them as a mail clerk for UGIF. My functions were very simple. I had to deliver the mail, when the mail entered, they were addressed to various people, and I would make the rounds and pick up, there was an ad box, pick up the mail, the various letters, go up to my little office where there were other people working, and register the mail and stamp it and mail it out. That was my function. The card which helped us, which I will show later on, was delivered. It took about 3 weeks before it was registered and stamped by the High Commissioner for Jewish Affairs and by the German authorities, with my name, saying that I was a clerk and by the vice president of the organization, with the name of my father in the back, and I had put down also the name of my mother. In the meantime, I received, and I will show you later on, the little card saying that she had been deported on the 14th of August with my kid brother. Now, it was, I don't know if I had received that card, if I would have been able to get her out. I doubt it. I don't know, but it was maybe a matter of days. I don't know. In the meantime, she was deported, and she left on the transport. It's been documented 19, and she arrived in Auschwitz on the 9th. She left on the 14th of August, and on the transport 19, and arrived in Auschwitz on the 19th, and was selected automatically with a child. Now, of course, we didn't know all that. I was working for this organization. My father was able to normalize his situation because there was some a liaison fellow in the organization who dealt with the police, and I remember went to see him, explaining that my father had returned from wherever he was.
I can take that.
Yes.
I can take that, or you can put it.
Yes.
I don't want it to interfere with your face.
And and one day he took him to the police headquarters, and he was actually, his situation was normalized, that he was protected by me, and there was a photostatic copy of my card, which allowed me to work for this organization and to be exempt from arrest. So he was able to walk around free, so to speak, in and not to be, and they didn't come anymore. For apparently was a link between the police headquarters, and they had his name, and there was a link. Now, my brother, who was not covered by me, and who could not stay in with my great uncle, returned to the apartment and stayed in that little kitchen for 13 months. He would sleep there. We had set up a little mattress, and in the evening, because he felt more safe, he would go in. Sometimes he would sleep with us here, but many times he would be there, and if there was a knock at the door, immediately he would.
What was what street were you living on?
Here?
The address, yeah.
Rue Henri Chevreau, on the 17th, Rue Henri Chevreau. He had no ration card, that means we had to share whatever food we had. There was no toilet, as I mentioned, so we had to carry chamber pots, for off hours, that we could not meet anybody in the staircase. Life went on that way. I was able to get authorization to bring some food, because I had in a canteen, like organization cafeteria, and requested, because since I didn't have any mother, if they could authorize me to bring some food at home for me and my father, and they authorized, so I would bring a little pot of soup, or whatever they gave me, little meat, whatever. And my father was a pretty good cook, who would supplement that with whatever he bought on the black market, and we would share with my brother.
At what point did they know that your father so-called returned, or had been living with you, since you originally declared that he was missing?
I would say as soon as I received that card granting me a certain amount of immunity, I all of a sudden I said my father came back, and I went to see the officer in charge of the liaison with the police, and said if since he was going to the police headquarters practically every day, if my father could come along, and that they would be normalized and showing that I was a regular employee of this UGIF organization, and it was part of his job, and that's what he did. He went. My father was not, he was afraid, but they accepted. They said fine, and they stamped his card, like now he continued to work on and off for non-Jewish Aryan bosses, and there was still a certain, as I mentioned, certain activity which still went on, even though it was there was no much leather, and it was ersatz or whatever. It was not plastic, was not invented, but it was some kind of ersatz leather that they used for bags, and he worked on and off, although we basically lived from the meager salary that I brought back was minimum wage, but it didn't make any difference. In the meantime, my mother was living with us, and we were still talking about when my mother would come back, when we'd all be together. So I had there was also social activities within the organization, Jewish Boy Scouts, which I joined, and it became like on Saturdays and Sundays I would meet there, and we put up plays, or there was a Kopernik synagogue, which was by the way bombed. There was a few years ago, if you recall, we would meet there and we would sing Hoaz and Zionist songs, Jewish songs, and we would spend the day that way. We were like a group of 10 youngsters. Some of them worked with me in this organization, and that's how I got into that. And we even put up plays. Became like not that there were too many talent in that direction, but anyway, we just put up a certain play. That was it went on until 1943. Now, in 1943 became extremely harsh for Jews, because they would pick up any Jew, although the Vichy government. Oh, by the way, I should mention that in November 1942, the Allies landed on the 8th of November, landed in North Africa, and on the 11th of November, the Germans occupied all of France. There was no more line of demarcation, and there was no more occupied zone. Everything was occupied, north and south, and it was all of France was under German control. Things became very hard, especially after Stalingrad, when for Jews, because we felt that they would take it out on the Jews, and they did. If you were caught for anything, if you didn't have the Jewish star, or if you broke the curfew, or if you were denounced, you would be arrested and sent to the Drancy and deported, regardless if you were Jewish or not. Then they extended the groups of arrests, and first it was stateless in July 1942. Then they extend to other groups it became the Polish, and they became the Romanian, and they became the Hungarians, and they became all the other the Belgian, all the nationalities became part of that, and they started to deport children also, which they had never done before. The transport where my brother was deported, the transport that actually was the first transport where children were deported to Auschwitz, but in August 1942. Now I'm going forward, and it's 1943. Now there's a very curious experience which happened, and another luck, if you can call it that way. Now I'm on vacation, 2 weeks. We were allowed entitled to vacation. Of course, you don't go anywhere, you stay home. And seeing my granduncle, or playing chess with my brother, we played chess. And my father was at a job for doing some work for an Aryan boss, and he's coming. He had delivered his work, and he was coming downstairs, and he hears up somebody coming from there, and he turns around, and there's an SS, SD, Sicherheitsdienst, and he sees him with a star. He says, "Do you dirty Jew?" And he slaps him. "What do you have in your suitcase?" He said, "Nothing, I just delivered work." Work? Let's go back to your boss. Let's see if you legal. Are you legal? Yes. I mean, my son works for UGIF. He said, "That's worthless." Okay, let's go back. Let's see. You probably work. You were illegal anyway. So he goes back. He says, "Go." So they go in, the SS, and he says, he spoke perfect French, that fellow. He must have been part of the, I don't know. He was absolutely bilingual. His French was impeccable, the SS. Maybe he was French, I don't know. Of course he spoke German, but perfect. So he said, "Does this man work here?" "Yes." "Can I see the books where he's registered?" "Oh, but we don't have the accountant. The accountant is not there." He says, "Fine." He says, you ask the accountant to be there this afternoon, 3 o'clock, and I want this man to be here with the accountant, and I'll be there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My father comes home with this awful story. He said, "What?" Yeah, I said, "But I don't know." He said, "Okay," he said, "you come with me. You have the original of this, because I have only a photostatic copy. You come with me." And I said, "Fine. I come with you, fine." So at 3 o'clock we're there, and at 3:30, German car stops, chauffeured limousine. He comes out, comes up. "Oh, the son is there, fine." He said, "I have everybody. You are arrested. I have received orders. You coming with us. You are arrested. Let's go back to your apartment. You're going to pack, and that's it. But it's worthless. You are arrested, both of you. I don't have to see the books. Let's go." Now my brother was in the apartment. Now we had told him, if we make any noise, you run into the hiding place. Now we made noise because we lived on the second floor. Here we live on the second floor. Now we opened the door. He was already in there. And this German looks around. He said, "That's nice furniture. All of that will be good for our civilians, you know, you Jews, you've killed them with your bombings. So my father, who spoke German, because he had worked during the First World War in Germany in the mining field, you know, he spoke German. He had been in Berlin. He said, "We're not responsible for the war. We're just working people. I didn't make the war. Look, we live like very simple. We're not rich. We're just working people." He said, "I don't care." He says, one for 100, 100 for one. You pack. Then he says, "What's up there?" He said he saw those books. I said, "Oh, that's those textbooks from class." You know, my heart really stopped, because if he would have removed the book, then he could have seen that there's a door behind it. He said, okay, you pack." And so, I said, "Well, that's finished. That's it." So we packed whatever we could to suit 3 suitcases. Went downstairs. He took us on that beautiful car with chauffeur. And he said, "Well, this is your last. I'm going to give you a tour of Paris, because that's the last time you see Paris. You know, you might as well have a good impression of Paris." So he gave us a grand tour, showed us the Champs-Élysées. He said, "Look around. You'll never see Paris again. So you better look around, nice." Then he stops with the Susse, and that's the Gestapo headquarters. Now you come in, I remember, with our suitcases. There's a staircase. You walk into an office, all German with the SD, Sicherheit, security, you know. There's a portrait of Hitler. And he said, "Okay, you stand there." The chief wasn't there. They're all officers, you know, discussing things. So we wait. 10 minutes later, a little German functionary, you know, with glasses, walks in, and they're all wise. "Hi, Hitler." You know, all these. He looks at us. He said, "What are these 2 people?" So the officer who had arrested us, he said, "Well, you see," German, of course, "they are illegal. I arrested the father. He works illegally." So I says, "I beg your pardon." You know, he spoke German. "I'm not illegal. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not illegal. I mean, I work here. I mean, I have working permit. My son works for the UGIF, and we am protected by his work." He said, so the officer, he said, "Well, you see, look at how the Jewish race spreads over the world. The mother was Hungarian, the father is Polish, the son now is French." So my father said, "First of all, my wife was not Hungarian, she's Polish, and the son is French. He was born in Paris." Yes. So, you know, you could see he did not like, for whatever reason we don't. That's a miracle. He did not. He said, "But I don't understand why you arrested them." And he said, "What is your trade?" To my father. He said, "Well, I make very luxury handbags, you know." He said, "I'm a very skilled worker." So he says, and you could see the other fellow, he was losing one, and he says, "You know, the rule, when one member of the family is deported, the entire family has to be deported. The mother was deported, we have to deport the father and the son." So my father said, "Listen, the rule is maybe now, but my wife was deported a year ago." He said, "You say that you are a skilled worker in leather. Do you think you could make a bag for me?" He said, "Of course, a bag, sure. I mean, Of course I have no leather. He said, oh, I have plenty of leather. I have plenty of leather. He says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll let you go, but you have to come back next week. I'll have the leather for you. He said, okay, you can let him go. Okay, out. The officer could, I could not believe it, because what did it mean for him that for us to be, it was unusual to be out from the Gestapo, so he says, okay, well, you can go. Okay, he said, well, I can go out. I need I can go out. He said, okay, I'll let you, I'm going to accompany you to the door. My belief is that there must have been some kind of hostility between the officer. He didn't like him, and he did certain things that he didn't like, and it was a put down. And because what did it mean for us to be sent to Drancy, and that's my interpretation when I think back, So anyway, we were out. We appeared. My brother did not believe it. He was already on the verge of packing, of trying to leave the apartment, because he knew that the officer said, tomorrow I'll come and I'm going to empty the apartment with a truck for our bombed out civilians in Germany. So we knew that he had to leave immediately. He could not believe it. Now the dilemma was, should he go back the following week and take a chance, or he said, but where are we going to go? We have nowhere to go. Now if I said, are you going to go back? He said, okay, I'll take that chance. I'll go back to that. So I said, okay. In the meantime, I had warned my office, because there was also a German liaison, between the German authorities and this. But
We're running out of tape. I
okay.
don't want to stop the story
Okay.
in the middle, but we're out of tape. We'll
Oh.
just take you 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay.
okay, you're getting
Oh,
always.
it's
So